Hey guys, Mashburn here again, and today we're going to do the first of two nervous system labs. We're just going to have two of them, one basically on the main part of the nervous system, the neuron, the brain, the spinal cord, and then I'll do another one on the special senses. So let's get started, and I've included this in your shell. It's got basically the lab guide that we have here at Calhoun, and it's got all your structures that you need to know. So make sure you print this out or download it, and that way you can follow along and know what you need to know for the exam. So I'm just going to move right along my notes so that you can follow along with yours as well. Alright, so when you look at the first thing part of the nervous system is it's made up of what? Basically neurons and some neuroglial cells, which hopefully you've learned about the neuroglial cells. But when we talk about neurons, we've got several different types of neurons. And when we look at neurons, we classify them either anatomically, so these are the anatomical types, which basically means what do they look like. And so we have multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar. And you probably already heard this in one of your lecture videos. Multipolar means that let's start at the bottom, unipolar. Uni means one, right? So that means there's one something coming off the cell body. So when you're looking at anatomical types, you're counting the number of somethings that come off the cell body. So unipolar has one. Bipolar has two. You have a dendrite end and an axon end. So this is your axon, this is your dendrite. And they kind of come together. So information, remember, information comes this way on a neuron from the dendrite to the axon. So information comes here, it kind of goes into the cell body, comes back out, and goes in this direction. In a bipolar, this is the dendrite, this is the axon, the information comes here, goes through the cell body, and continues on its way. Now multipolar, this looks most like what you're used to. This looks more like a motor neuron, the same thing you talked about in the muscle unit, a neuron that would synapse with a muscle. You've got a bunch of somethings coming off the cell body. So here's your cell body. So there's more than two somethings. You have one axon. They all have one axon. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dendrites. It can have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It's just going to have more than one. So find your cell body, count the number of somethings coming off of it. There'll always be one axon and either one dendrite if it's bipolar, or more than one dendrite if it's multipolar, and then a dendrite-axon combination if it's unipolar. And those are your anatomical divisions. Sorry, I didn't realize that wasn't a very big slide, was it? Sorry, let me make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so the next type of division is your physiologic. So your physiological types of neurons. In this case, you have motor, sensory, and interneurons. Alright, so think way back to the very first lecture you heard me give. We talked about information's got to come in from your senses to the brain. So that's the incoming information, which we called afferent, right? And then your interneurons, that was your brain and spinal cord, right? In your central nervous system, that was where the integration took place. That red doesn't show up real well, does it? And then your motor is your output, or your efferent. There's an E there. Okay, so this is a model that we've taken out of the lab, and this is a cross-section of the spinal cord. And so what you notice, here's your spinal cord, okay, and these are spinal nerves coming off to the side. And what you notice is there's nerves, there's kind of two sets. Well, look at the key here. You have this green and yellow, it says afferent. So that must be information coming in, right? So here's your information coming in. So these are your afferent or sensory nerves. They're meeting inside the spinal cord. So this is going to be your interneurons, where some of the decisions are made. Does it need to be dealt with there, or sent up to the brain for, is it a reflex, or do you need to go for the brain for some higher brain power? the decision is made, then you have to send the information back out. And these red and black ones are your efferent. So that would be your motor. So on this spinal cord model, you need to be able to recognize what's the incoming information and the outgoing information. And the key, besides remembering the colors, don't remember the colors, look for this thing. That's called the dorsal root ganglion, and the afferent fibers always pass through the dorsal root ganglion, okay? So if you see this dorsal root ganglion, this bump, that means you're on the dorsal side, and that means that's where the afferent fibers are coming through. So that's your sensory side. And the other side is your motor side. Alright, so those are your motor neurons, your interneurons, and your sensory neurons. Alright, so here's, going back and looking at the motor neuron, we did this, a basic type of neuron when we talked about the neuromuscular junction. So here's your motor neuron, and we just want to kind of go through and make sure you remember some of those structures associated with a motor neuron. You have what's called the perikaryon, or the body. So kind of this whole thing is the perikaryon, or body. You can also use the word soma, basically the cell body part of the neuron. Alright, you have your nucleus, which is where the DNA is. You have, remember you have an endoplasmic reticulum, which you can call your ER. Well, there's a rough ER, and on the rough ER, you've got these little, they look like candy sprinkles. So this is the Nissl body. The rough ER with these candy sprinkles is called the Nissl body. The blue thing that's coming off the neuron, and it goes all the way, it's inside this yellow stuff, it goes all the way through there. The blue thing is the axon, and it's covered up right now with myelin, which hopefully you know a little bit about if you've watched some earlier videos. You have the axon hillock, which is this little bulge between the axon and the cell body, and this is where the action potential is generated. You have, hang on, I'll get some neurofibrils in just a minute, I've got to take this thing off. You have dendrites, and the dendrites are the things that bring information into the cell body, so you have the information coming in here. These are the dendrites. Now, one thing I don't like about this model is you've got these little blue things here. It's like Hershey Kisses. Those are not dendrites. Okay? I wish they'd painted them a different color. These are axon terminals from another neuron. So see this neuron here? It's coming out and synapsing on this cell body, or on this neuron. So these little Hershey Kiss looking things, these are actually the axon terminals of other neurons. These things are sticking out here and here, 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 here. Those are all dendrites. So then you have your axon, and then these yellow things are the Schwann cells. And hopefully you remember that Schwann cells make myelin, and so they are insulating the cells. Then you have these little gaps called the nodes of Ranvier. And you have several different synapses on this particular model. This is showing you a motor neuron that's synapsing out with a muscle. So this is just a typical neuromuscular junction. That's a synapse, right? And then you have these little synapses of these axon terminals synapsing on this cell body. Now, if they synapse on another, if the axon synapses on a dendrite, you call it axodendritic. It's on your list. If the axon synapses directly onto a cell body, it's axosomatic, from the word soma meaning cell body. Now I want to look a little bit further at the axon. So here's the axon going through. Another thing you can see on the this model, I forgot to point out, are these little mitochondria. All these are mitochondria. You have some smooth ER, and you also have a Golgi. So just like a regular cell, the same structures you see in other cells you also see in the neuron. So let's take away and cut into the Schwann cell so that you can see what's going on there. And hopefully you realize by now that a Schwann cell is basically just a piece of myelin that kind of rolls around an axon, kind of like that. Okay, so you've taken a Schwann cell that wraps itself around the axon. So this is one Schwann cell, this is one Schwann cell. So this whole wrapping of the Schwann cell makes the myelin sheath. So this is all myelin, making that myelin sheath. The outermost layer of the myelin sheath is called the neurolemma because as the Schwann cell wraps around, kind of like a pig in a blanket, the nucleus winds up being on the outside layer, so we call it the neurolemma. And the last thing are these little fibers. They're kind of hard to see on this picture. Let's see. These little fibers here, they continue through the axon, and those are the neurofibrils, and that's basically a way to transport things up and down the axon, kind of like train tracks. That's the way I like to describe them. So that's your motor neuron. So you put all these neurons together, and you're going to have your motor neurons coming out from your spinal cord. So that's where they would be coming from. So now we're going to talk about the spinal cord in a little bit more detail. The first thing we want to mention are the meninges, and hopefully you have heard of these before. If not, Miss Graham does a really good job describing these in the YouTube video. And basically the meninges are membranes around the brain and spinal cord. So they're membranes around the brain and spinal cord. The outermost layer is called the dura mater. So this is the outermost, or most superficial. Then you have the arachnoid. The middle layer. Then you have the pia mater. This is the innermost. And so it's both on the spinal cord and the brain. So a good way to see it's on the spinal cord model. And the dura mater, think durable, is this durable layer around the outside. Mater means mother, so literally is the tough mother. And if you were to come in lab and actually dissect a sheep brain, which we do in class, you'll see it's a really tough piece of almost plasticky type material. That's the dura mater, or tough mother. Just deep to that is the arachnoid mater, and that's this gray arachnoid as in spider. So it looks kind of like a spider web. So it's a spider webby looking layer. And on a brain, you'll look when you go below the dura mater into the arachnoid mater. It's also you'll see the vessels. So it looks kind of, here's a picture. It looks kind of like a spider web on the brain. You'll see vessels in that area. And then the deepest layers are really thin, very delicate layer, and that's what pia means, delicate. And it's just right on the spinal cord or right on the brain. Those are your three layers of meninges. Again, Miss Graham also describes these in her YouTube video. When you're looking at a spinal cord, again, we're going to look at that cross section. You have gray matter and white matter. So what looks like brown, this is the gray, and this color, this is the white matter. And what makes white matter white is myelin. So this is where you have the myelinated axons, and in the gray matter, this is where the cell bodies are, where there's no myelin. So this is cell bodies, this is myelinated axons. That makes your gray and white matter. You'll notice the gray matter has these projections, and we call these horns. You have a dorsal horn, or posterior horn, an anterior horn, and a lateral horn. So how do I know which orientation it is? I told you about this little bump a few minutes ago. This is the dorsal root, so this means this is the dorsal side, so dorsal and posterior mean the same thing. So this is your posterior horn, so this must be your anterior or ventral horn, and the one out to the side is your lateral horn. And right in the middle is a little hole, and that's your central canal. If this is the dorsal root ganglion, then this must be the dorsal root, and this must be the ventral or anterior root. So do you remember what's the difference between the dorsal and ventral side? What kind of information is coming and going? Dorsal is afferent, ventral, efferent. Okay, so once you've talked about the spinal cord, you got to talk about the things that are coming off the spinal cord. And these are called the spinal nerves. And these are peripheral. This is part of your PNS. Okay, the spinal nerves are your PNS. So here's your spinal cord, and then coming off are your spinal nerves. Spinal cord is central, spinal nerves are peripheral. And I'm not going to make you name each spinal nerve and tell me, name it individually. What I want you to know, there are 8 pair of cervical. They're just like the vertebra. Same names. 8 pair of cervical. There were 7 cervical vertebrae, right? But there's actually 8 cervical nerves. There's 12 pair of thoracic. There are 5 pair of lumbar. 5 pair, let's go lumbar. 5 sacral. And 1 pair of coccygeal. You'll also notice that you have spinal cord is actually a cord down to about the level of L2 vertebra, about that level, and then it kind of splits off. It kind of looks like this. It looks kind of flares out, and that's called the cauda equina, which literally means horse's tail. Equine, horse, cauda is tail. So below the level of L2 is not really a cord anymore, it's the cauda equina. And this is one of the areas where if you do a lumbar puncture or an epidural, things like that, they'll go in this region, in that cauda equina region. Alright, so that is basically the neuron and the spinal cord. So we're going to move on and do the brain. And I think I'm going to break this into a second video. So hang on, I'll be right back, give you guys a break, and then we'll come back and we'll start this video.